Have you ever struggled with compassion? I know I have. It's really easy to be petty, messy, and overall horrible and terrible. Especially around the holidays, which it is now. If you don't have much, it's easy to get mean. Especially, specifically, the recent presidential election has left me a little bit puzzled, if I don't say so myself. If I do say so myself. I was in a bubble. I would watch The View all the time. And maybe I just thought Kamala Harris was going to win. But Donald Trump won by a landslide. And so, maybe not a landslide, I don't know, I haven't checked the numbers, but it felt like a lot. And I think in that moment, it's easy for me to hate on people, have judgment, sort of do the blame game. But I don't want to do that. I want to understand why. And, that's not what this video is about, but just the feeling of being angry is so easy, and wanting to blame someone or trying to find the problem has been stirring up a lot recently because of that. And so I wanted to investigate that. And through a TikTok, which I'll show here, I've discovered a new mantra, and I've been really using this as my guiding light, as a way to really steer and drive my life. And I'm looking at notes. And the video is basically about one of the main pillars, ideas, of values of Buddhism. And I feel like, Buddhism really makes sense to me right now. And Buddhism, they categorize it with religions, but it's not necessarily a religion. It's more of a philosophy, a lifestyle, a way of life. And this video isn't about Buddhism either, but essentially in Buddhism, one of the main pillars is that life is suffering, and that the reason for suffering is due to cravings and desires. There is a method to get rid of that suffering. You just have to follow this certain path. Very, very trimmed down version of what Buddhism is, but that's just sort of one of the main takeaways. What I like about it is it doesn't really center around any one god. It doesn't seem to be sort of centered around men, or sort of this idea of marriage or love, which I feel like a lot of other religions are centered around family and love, marriage, and nothing wrong with that, but just not where I'm at right now in life. So interesting to sort of have another really popular religion or belief system that just is centered around something else. It's driven by other themes. And I'm no expert in Buddhism. I just know literally the one thing. I want anyone watching this video to have another tool in their toolbox. Another way to manage life, because life can be hard. Life is suffering, as the Buddhists say. Life is challenging, and, it's not always that way. There's ups and downs, but how do we ride out the downs? What do we do to cope, to manage, to make sure that the things that cause us trouble in our life don't end our life? And I'm just really interested in opening up my heart and leading in love and light. So I already went over the main belief system of Buddhism, which is basically where this mindset or mantra comes off of. And it's also really derived from the TikTok that I saw, that I will quote. Honestly, thank you for that person for making that TikTok. It changed my life. I don't remember if the TikTok said it or this is just something I looked up online, but I have it in quotes. So someone else said it. It's it says that everyone is in their own deep suffering. Wow. And that sounds a little bleak, a little goth, a little catastrophic, a little crazy, but I think they mean it in a more simpler, neutral term. And I think, which is the point I'm going to get to, is that this mindset really helps me have compassion for other people. This mantra that I'm about to say, that I derive from this TikTok, really helps me understand other people better. It honestly even helps me understand myself better. And it just takes away a lot of the friction, a lot of the noise, a lot of the questioning, if that makes any sense. So again, saying this for anyone who's listening, for anyone that can also approach life with this mindset. And I think I wrote this, but it's derived from the original quote, but it's in quotes in my notes. I'm like, did I write this? I think I did though. I recognize that your behavior and actions are not centered around me. Life is difficult. We all have our own struggles. I have compassion for all humans, and your behavior and actions are a reflection of your own personal suffering. Wow. No, but seriously, it really has helped me understand life a little bit better, and definitely people a whole lot better. So, for example, say you're engaging with someone and they're rude, they're nasty, they're vindictive, they say terrible things to you about you. It's obviously the natural instinct to just dish it right back. Like, why wouldn't you? I would obviously, maybe even to this day, still do the same thing. But if you think about what I wrote, and it's that you recognize that people's behaviors and actions are a projection of their own internal suffering, then you can have like a paused moment. You can be like, does this person want to be acting this way? Maybe not consciously or like directly. And like, you can understand that, okay, if they're projecting this vitriol that's so terrible, their internal monologue, their internal self, their thoughts and emotions going on the inside must also reflect what's happening on the outside. It must be even worse than that. So if that's the case, I, as the person receiving that I think, wow, that's terrible for you to have such inner turmoil, such a conflict going on inside of you that it bleeds out onto another person. That sucks. And why would you want to have a miserable life? You want to have a great life. So in turn, I, as the person on the receiving end of that pain, I can understand that this is not something you want to be going through. This is terrible for you as a person to be experiencing life in this way. I have compassion for that. I empathize and sympathize with another human being that's going through a difficult time, even if that difficult time is impacting me and could potentially create a difficult time for me. Right? Does that make sense? It's like the saying, hurt people hurt people. If you're already hurt, I understand what being hurt is like. Most people understand what being hurt is like. Why would I want to mirror that to you and inflict hurt back to you? Right? I, who believe to be a compassionate person, meaning if I do not want anyone to endure more pain than they need to, would not want to then inflict you with more pain than what you're already going through. I see that you're in pain, and we'll meet that with compassion and kindness and love because you're already going through your own thing that has nothing to do with me. Craving and desire is the root of suffering. And Buddhism presents this mechanism they call the Noble Eightfold Path to end suffering. And even as I was saying it, it's like, oh, that sounds a little condescending or holier than thou or smug or patronizing, and maybe it is a little bit. But if it reduces suffering for me, if it can reduce additional suffering for another person, I think that's a cost willing to take. And obviously there's a lot of nuance with this methodology, this mindset, this mantra. You're kind of walking a fine line. There are definitely people who can take advantage of that, who can use that against you if you're in an abusive situation, if you're in a toxic situation. But I think you have to understand what compassion means. Compassion can still mean that you prioritize yourself. Compassion can still mean that you have boundaries with other people. Compassion can still mean that you don't accept negative, hateful behavior and actions, but you don't return that. You acknowledge that, wow, what that person is doing sucks, and it must mean that they're going through something terrible. So I have compassion for that. I understand that that must be a really painful thing to have to go through, a really painful way to live. You don't allow people to continue to do that to you or make it a behavior, a repeated pattern. You create boundaries, you lessen communication, you distance yourself from them, you don't engage in toxic behavior with them, and you'll start to learn different mechanisms that will enable you to have compassion and create boundaries for another person. That creates less suffering for yourself and other people and anyone in that situation. Do you think this is something that you can do? I really hope that anyone watching this can ponder on this. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'd love to discuss this more and discuss on how you agree with this, how you disagree with this, how this is helpful, how this is not helpful. I'm really looking forward to the discussion that comes about this. Love you.